Today, I'd love to welcome John Flaherty, who is an internationally recognised life guide, author, and well-respected leader in the field of addiction recovery. And today, John will be introducing his work on unwanted habits and dependencies, low self-worth, and emotional and mental pain. So welcome, John.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Delighted to be part of this and to be speaking to whomever might be actually listening. So I will do my best. I've found over the years that the way to do that is to literally not rely so much on what John Flaherty has to say, but to go to a deeper place within, to what I call my more conscious awareness. And I want to introduce a little bit of that to listeners today, what that could even mean. And the sense I've made of becoming more consciously aware is when we discover not to rely so much on what head has to tell us or direct us, although our head, our brain, our mind can work wonders. Really, we have such intelligence that we haven't yet always learned to harness that has so much more to teach us if we can but trust it, make a friend of it, listen to it, and speak to it. So that's what I'll be doing. As I do with anybody that I'm privileged to assist in their sojourn, in their making their way through this thing we call life, making sense of the nonsense of this world, and certainly coming to terms with anything to do with health matters, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, then it's always been a privilege for me to enter that person's life and to be able to introduce the whole idea, the whole concept of what it is to be more intelligent, to use our raising of consciousness, that which is absolutely available to us all of the time, and to literally command our body, our thoughts, our being into the direction that is actually more healthy, more wholesome, more life-giving, and as a result, far more beneficial to us all the way around. So that's it. Really, where do we start with all of this? Well, I suggest we start at the beginning. I know that when we come into this world, when you, as you're listening to this, realize that when you were in your mother's womb, you wanted for nothing. You will have been totally at peace, looked after, fed, nourished, safe. Your unconscious mind will have started to pick up many of the things from the outside world that you were about to be born into. Your conscious mind won't have fully been formed yet, but your unconscious mind certainly would have been taking on something of the maybe rather daunting prospect of leaving that beautiful place of security and safety and having to go and enter the great unknown. And as you prepared to do that, and then as the time came for you to pop out from your mother's womb, some amazing things were already beginning to happen. Because in those early months, in those early stages of our time here on this planet, we have an amazing amount of things happening in our brain, as many as 10 billion neurons, all wonderfully buzzing away inside of our brain, forming what are called synapse junctions. We might better think of them as being connections. 10 billion, that's an extraordinary number of neurons. Terrific activity. Why? Because everything is now becoming known. The unknown is becoming visible to us. Our smell, our touch, our taste, our experience of it through the senses is suddenly that which we have entered into. And there's a terrific amount of activity. The child, as early as it is at that place of absolute awe and wonder. Fabulous. In fact, in the first couple of years, as many as 1.8 million per second of these fabulous neurons are actually being formed. It's quite phenomenal just to even consider that. Then there's something rather disastrous that happens. very sad that happens. This goes for every single person on the planet, for yourself, Amanda, for myself, and for everybody that's listening today, that by the age of about 4 years old, there's a systematic culling of as many as 50% of those buzzing neurons. They're just destroyed. And that from what far more limited place, we begin to start making sense of this no sense world. We begin to form what it might feel like. It becomes our reality. It becomes the start of our programming. It becomes the beginning of our conditioning. It's how we actually govern everything from life from there on, unless, of course, we begin to become more consciously aware. And I'm going to come to that as we go through this little podcast today. So really, the process from that time on is actually, whether we've ever realized this or not, it's a forgetting. It's a forgetting process of that fabulous place that we came into the world right from the outset, and that we long to go back to, but that we've already been taken in a direction that's governed by so many people, so many places, so many circumstances outside of ourselves. We just give it away. It is very sad. And that happens to every single one of us, no matter what environment we're born into. So if you've had a, what you might consider to be a very happy start in life, maybe wonderful parents, maybe perfectly well looked after, guess what? Still, 50% of those buzzing neurons get to be destroyed as early as about the age of about 4 years old, for the simple reason that you're no longer the new kid on the block. There's nobody particularly paying such full attention to you as you once were in those very, very early months. You're not the long-waited, expected 9 months or so that everything and everybody was stopping your great arrival to come and burst in on the scene. Things have become more regular, rather mundane, both for you and for the environment, the people in that environment that you are now in the company of. And we start, of course, to discover how to go about this world. And we're quickly shown how to get it right and how we might get it wrong, where there's a sense of success and where there could be a sense of failure, what there is a thing called good and what there could be a thing called bad would be. And so it goes. All this time written into it, the possible reward and the possible punishment, that we could actually get things so wrong in life, that our emotional body, that our mental capacity might feel that it was down to ourselves that had got things so askew, so terribly, terribly wrong. And the fear of that stays with us a long time. We call it guilt. That's usually accompanied by shame. That can then become depression. That can then become many other forms of ill health. That then certainly becomes a form of absolute limitation about our otherwise magnificent self. I am privileged. I don't have children of my own, but I have two absolutely beautiful great nephew and great niece who are very much part of the life of my wife and I to this day. And I'm so thankful for them. I have written 2 books, and the first book, which is called Addiction Unplugged, How to Be Free, actually starts off with a story about the first of those children. He's called Aidan, and at the time he was 4. Now he's 14. That book is really quite old in a sense, but nonetheless, it's becoming more popular than ever today because it carries the message of what it is to be more consciously aware. And Aidan, at 14, I'm so delighted to say, because of the nourishment, because of the conscious parenting, and I hope a lot of assistance from his great uncle and his great auntie too, we've really made it our business to make sure that he doesn't feel crushed or abused or downhearted or think himself a failure or that he could possibly get anything wrong in life, but instead, to the best of our ability, to keep that magnificent, perfect place of connection to the source of life that sources everything, and that source that young Aidan is still alive and well at the age of 14. We also have beautiful Molly Anna who follows suit. And Molly Anna, she did it just yesterday. I wasn't actually feeling at my best yesterday. She burst through the door home from school singing, beautiful singing, the most magnificent kind of writer of poetic beauty that just comes from nowhere. Well, actually, it does. I'm saying from nowhere, but of course, it comes from her essence, that which she hasn't yet forgotten to remember. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that absolutely beautiful? Immediately, it changed the environment of the home, the house, the everything else that these two beautiful children walked in and reminded both Anne-Louise, my wife, and myself of how we could easily and do on a daily basis forget to remember that at one time that was as near as they are to the source of life that sources everything. And yet over time, the ways of the world pulls us into such tiny, tiny little places of little expectation about ourselves, certainly very little encouragement about that beautiful sense of presence and worthiness and newness and creativity and imagination. That, of course, was one time there with the buzzing neurons providing it all. And even more so, not only concentrating on the brain doing all that for us, but as I've discovered over the years, the heart itself has this fabulous memory bank of information that also, when we learn to speak and listen to our heart, it again reminds us of the preciousness of that which started in life for everyone, even if those people, unlike perhaps many of listeners, unlike myself, may have been born into an environment that was not so happy, that was not so encouraging, where there was a lot of illness, where there was an absence of presence, where there was not necessarily as much notice taken of yourself in those very early years. And it's more obvious to see where that culling of those neurons, that sense of your own self-worth and magnificence, would have been even more rapidly diminished. Wherever there has been abuse of whatever kind at that early stage, of course, literally closes that person down entirely until it doesn't. And so the nature of my work really has been to make sure until it doesn't. And it has been a terrific privilege with the knowledge I have, with that constant reminding from those two beautiful children, if nothing else, of how everyone should be, can be, is in their own divine right. We are what we might call a fractal of God. We are an individuation of the divine. We're a microcosm of the macrocosm. We can use whatever beautiful language, and it still doesn't really capture the beauty of, as we are, spiritual beings discovering how to have a human experience, how to live in this thing called a human body. It's struck me over the years that the least encouragement, the least continuance of that reminder, don't forget to remember. I write that on my Facebook nearly every day with a little caption to stimulate and to remind people, don't forget to remember. There was a time before ever there was your next problem, before ever there was an addictive compulsion that entered your life, before ever there was a tendency that had you going in the wrong direction, before ever there was a sense of failure, there was a time when there was not. If we can just take ourselves back to that time when there was not, then that repetition, that continuance of a sense of failure or illness or not being able to make the grade or somehow or other having got this life so terribly wrong, it would never enter in. It just would not enter in. And we owe it to ourselves, I believe, if that has happened along the way, to quickly learn to give ourselves back to ourself, the little s self back to the magnitude self, that connection with the divine, that microcosm of the macrocosm, because that's actually what we are. Now, if you are listening to this today and you feel that that is a million miles away from you, and it all just sounds like really nice, fluffy, spiritual kind of abstract language, well, I want to assure you that it will remain that way until it doesn't, right? Until it doesn't. And I can only really encourage you to therefore discover what you have forgotten to remember and to make sure you quickly go back to that starting place. I can help you with that. That's why I'm speaking on the People's Health Alliance, which in itself, a fabulous organization doing exactly that, literally breaking in on the scene. I have great admiration for the endeavor that PHA has, because it's doing that. It's making sure, really, that there are other possibilities. There are other ways of remaining healthy, fit, well. There are ways particularly of not forgetting to remember the fabulous wisdom of the brain cells, the cellular structure, and all that's there in the heart. The heart is 5,000 times more electrically magnificent and powerful than that of the brain, which I've already said is quite wondrous. And yet we fail to realize that that's our disposal. We've instead let it go small, 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 small. And our minds small, small, small. And news does it every day for us. That ridiculous thing called the news and newspapers, and full of lies and full of nonsense. And schooling does it. School is dreadful. You know, I said little Mollyana burst in yesterday after school. Well, fortunately, you know, she's only 7. She hasn't been there that long. She hasn't yet learned, as Aidan has had to fend off, that, you know, truth, okay, comes from authority, that intelligence is something to be remembered and then repeated. Memory and repetition, they get to be rewarded, and non-conformity, guess what? It gets to be punished. If we conform socially and intellectually, we'll be okay. And all the time, that is being fed to us. And it comes to us from every direction. I've mentioned schooling. It's even more so in university. It's there in every one of our institutions. It's through the health authorities, you know, incredibly limited version of life. I know that one of the many beautiful wisdoms that come from what the man called the father of medicine, Hippocrates, who says, you know, if you want to heal someone, find out what made that person sick in the first place, and then find out if they're ready to let go of what made them feel sick, right? That wasn't too long ago. I was talking to a GP, and I happened to mention the great oath of Hippocrates, the Hippocratic oath as it's known. And you know what? He didn't even know what I was talking about. I couldn't believe that. I could not believe that. But it happens. Okay, so we might as well believe it. Okay, so we accept. So we know that that's another form of incredible limitation. Now, Amanda, who I'm speaking to today, I know something about Amanda, only that reflexology is a fabulous area of interest and expertise of her own. And I was introduced to reflexology in 1981. The first time I'd ever heard from it was a guy who was visiting, actually. I think he was from South America. And he was full of this, and he wanted to tell me all about the magnificence of reflexology, how we can understand the body so differently, how the organs of the body, the energy system of the body. I was absolutely enthralled. And from that time on, I was all the time ready to look for more and more and more about the energy system, which is our body. And the energy system, which isn't just our body, it's our minds, our thoughts, it's our hearts, it's everything that we put out there and everything that we allow or that we stop allowing to enter into our life that would prevent our magnificent self from remaining intact. So there are any number of different starting places. And again, that's what I appreciate about the People's Health Alliance. It's all the time introducing people to more and more options. Today, all I can really do is to say that my work over the years, it's changed a lot because life is changing all of the time. but I've kept abreast of how I feel that even when I talk about spirituality, a better word I would suggest is consciousness. Because consciousness, just like spirituality, is a stepping into the unknown. And yet, as soon as we allow ourselves to go just a bit further beyond the ordinary, the mundane, that which we've got so used to and that which we think we're so limited by, that's when magic literally begins to happen. That's the wonder we then begin to recapture, just like Molly-Anna and Aidan do for myself most days when I'm in their presence. Now, for 11 years of my life, I was a Catholic priest. And I was absolutely delighted to actually release myself from that period of time too. However, I had trained for it for a lot of years. It was all I had preferred. I actually believed from a very young age that that was the only platform available to me to be able to speak in any way spiritual. For me, the Christ message was perfectly easy to understand and so readily able to put into practice. I discovered in the years in that life that I unfortunately became not more expanded at all, but more and more limited. Because while I was heart and soul into that way of work, the expectations of the institution was very, very limiting, stifled the very life out of me. I later learned that I was probably having what most people would call a breakdown. Everything really was falling apart. It was breaking down, and I thought it was disastrous at the time, but actually it proved to be my waking up. My waking up to the realization that even in the work I do to this day, I'm probably reaching and speaking, and with more freedom than ever, of the spiritual and, in fact, the consciousness arising in us all than I was ever able to do with such dogma and conformity and religious teaching, actually shrouding the very beautiful message of Christ consciousness. What I learned in those years, and there are many, many, many things, is that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Because as at the death of such a large number of people, and I can honestly say many, many, many times, I literally watched at the bedside the spirit, the soul, leave the body. And as far as I can recall, in nearly every instance, I could also witness the sense of relief and release on the human body as that return to the norm of the creator of that life went full circle back to its origin, back to the place of remembrance, back to the place of the child, newly formed, back to safety, back to completion. When you witness something like that over and over, how could it not expand your consciousness? Why? Well, it did for me, to look outside of the ordinary. What I also learned that most of the people within the religious setting were bowed down by conformity, guilt, shame. I must have heard thousands and thousands of confessions. So there's no one can actually tell me that I do not understand the human being. I had every possibility of learning every single thing about what a human could possibly be struggling with. When I left the priesthood, not having a knowledge of where I would do it, but still drawn somewhat toward the caring profession, and again, it was fairly early on, beginning of the 90s, then it was straight into working with those AIDS, HIV positive. And at that time, everybody being terrified of the great unknown of that. And yet, and I think I've always had this about me. Do you know what? I didn't have any natural fear about that. Actually, I found that speaking to those people, again, taught me a huge amount about the human being. And what I realized that although there were many people there sick and presenting with that diagnosis, Do you know the ones that actually really, really were made extremely ill or died as a result of that were the ones that had low self-worth. They were the ones far more susceptible. They were the ones whose immune system was far, far, far more vulnerable than those that had that little bit more about themselves. I later read books like Louise Hay, who, understood the metaphysical so well. And it made such sense because I had already witnessed exactly what she's explained so well. That, of course, the physical is just a manifestation of the emotional distress, the emotional lack of self-worth, that forgetting to remember our essence. From that, I entered another world, and it has been mine for most of my years. I work with people who struggle with addictions of one kind or another, dependencies, I prefer to call them. Addictions, they come in all manner of things. Often enough, it's alcohol, substance use, but it can be everything under the sun. It can be gambling, it can be over shopping, it can be excessive eating, not eating enough. It can even be just this total desire to want to be right about something, right? We can get really hung up on so many things. What do I learn totally about those in addiction? They just they know their own magnificence is bursting at the seams to just be given the okay to go and be lived out, but it's being kept in this tiny, tiny, tiny little place of limitation. I've never yet had anybody presenting with a form of addictive behavior who hasn't been the most wonderful person to connect with. Why? Because they've been hurt. They've just been really hurt somewhere along the line. They've been ignored. People have been absent when they've needed them most of all. They've been misunderstood. They've lost direction. They've lost their center. And yet they know. And in the various addiction centers I worked in for a lot of my life, the men and sometimes the women, I often worked in all male institutions, they were on the edge of their seat listening to the raising of consciousness and what the spiritual could possibly mean and how we can speak to our cellular bodies and how everything that maybe seemed dead suddenly becomes alive again. And to this day, people will write to me now and they'll start a little message and say, so I just saw you on whatever, and I thought, and I'd just like to know, and I know you won't remember me. They always say, I know you won't remember me. And how could I not remember somebody that I've let into my life to that extent and really touched the heart of? Of course, I remember that person. Beautiful souls have entered my life and taught me so much. My wife, Anne-Louise, being the prized one. Beautiful, beautiful. Told me how to soften my heart. The two little children in my life have done likewise. For yourselves listening, wherever you are, whatever you're picking up from that which I'm attempting to open up to you this day, is that whatever has been breaking down in your life, maybe just let it. Maybe just let it. Maybe it was never going to work, never should have worked in the first place. Okay? If it's a breakdown, as we think of a breakdown being medical, let drop away an idea about yourself that you thought you had to keep so intact, but was maybe actually destroying you, maybe actually keeping your heart contained to such the extent that you've forgotten to remember the truth of who you are. If you wish to connect with me at any time, you know you can do that. I work with people all over the world. I'm in this room here today. I describe it as the TARDIS. I've got a nice big picture of the TARDIS on the wall opposite me because I can come into this little room here. At one moment, I can be, I don't know, in Vancouver, Canada, and the next time I'm across over in Toronto, or I can be down somewhere in the United States, and then an hour later, I can be back in the UK or across to Ireland or somewhere in Europe. And that's there. And people are connecting with me. Why? Because they're so ready for a new message about the things that they know to be true. This is the beautiful thing. It doesn't take a huge amount from me to explain and go over and to repeat. No, They'd just forgotten to remember, right? And when it is music to the ears for that to be just presented to them again. That's a little bit about what I am about, what I do. It's what I do. It's not who I am, but it's what I do. Who I am is just like Molly and Aidan. It's far more magnificent than that. But what I do is I demonstrate, show, teach, because it does need teaching, people to do same for themselves, no matter what their predicament. So listen to me, and listen to me well if you can. Amanda tells me she listens to podcasts while she's cleaning and dusting and doing all kinds of other things. And podcasts can do that, and they're great for that. But if for a minute, tell you what, I would love to just do this for a minute, Amanda, if there's time, because I don't want to let this run out of time. But will you just take a moment, if you're listening to this podcast, and do yourself an enormous favor? Will you talk to your cellular body? Will you do that now? You might think, how do I do that? I tell you what, I'm going to show you how to do that. Will you talk to the cells of your body? Some people say we have as many as 75 trillion cells coursing through our body, all of them with terrific intelligence, and all of them literally eavesdropping on everything we say to ourselves, about ourselves, good, bad, indifferent, everything we think about ourselves, everything we experience about ourselves. So will you please start choosing differently? And will you, to the best of your ability, go back to your place of remembrance before you forgot how to do any of these things? And now, will you talk this beautiful message to yourselves? And I assure you, when they hear this message, it will, if you could hear each of the 75 trillion cells shout, yippee, it would be a bit like that. It would be as if, oh my God, this person at last is taking notice of me. We've got the attention. Come on, boys, let's go into action. What message are they going to give us? And we'll go to town on it right now. So I suggest you give it a shot. I'm going to take you through this. If it's helpful to you, close your eyes, keep your eyes open, do whatever, but take it in. It's in the first person. And as I speak it, beginning with the little word I, then you take it into your own heart, into your own mind. Let the cells do the rest. And in the course of this, begin to remember that whenever there was a time before your mental health issue, your emotional struggle, your challenges in your relationships, in your health, in your finance, whatever it may have been, know that all is well. The cells are working with you right now. And this is how it is. It's natural for my body to be well. And even if I don't know what to do in order to get better, my body does know. I have trillions of cells, each of them with individual consciousness, and they know how to achieve their individual balance. When this condition that I struggle with began, I didn't know what I know now. And if I had known then what John is reminding me right now, then this condition couldn't have even got started. I don't need to understand the cause of this condition, which is sometimes like an illness. I don't need to explain how this experience of this condition even got going. I only have to gently, eventually release this illness, this condition, this struggle in mind and in body. It doesn't matter that it got started because it's reversing its course right now. Command that into being. Do that right now. Let the cells go do the great job in this moment in time. And they're right on it, I assure you now. They've just been waiting for you to give it the green light. It's natural that it would take some time for my body to begin to align to my improved thoughts of well-being, but there's no hurry about any of this because my body knows what to do. Well-being, it's natural to me, and my inner being is intricately aware of my physical body. My cells, they're now asking for what they need in order to thrive. And that source from which I came, that source is everything, is answering those requests. I'm in very good hands. And so I will relax now and allow communication between my body and my source. My only work is to relax and breathe. I can do that. I can do that very easily. And that's it. And that's it. That's the first introduction to you not forgetting to remember the very magnificent being that you are, and that has been, in many respects, just been eroded, made little of, and it's too precious, too important to do that. As you raise your consciousness, I assure you it has a magnificent magnetic effect. People around about you won't quite be able to pinpoint what it is, but they'll begin to see, feel, and hear a difference in you immediately. And they'll want something of what you have because it's that powerful. That's a giving of yourself back to yourself. That's a loving yourself back into life. And if you never had sufficient of that coming from other people, other places, other times, I assure you, should I make connection with you, that's my only task in this life. It's a beautiful one. And as I do that for you, I give myself much the same. So it's a win-win. So Amanda, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to some of your listeners today. I know you'll remind people of how they can connect with me directly if they choose to do so. There are 2 books. The titles probably say it all. The first, Addiction Unplugged, How to Be Free. The only thing anybody actually really craves, I want to be free. Well, we were. And then suddenly people decided, and situations decided for you that you were not. Okay, overturn that one. Of course we are. Of course we are. When we raise our consciousness, we will find we are not alone as we thought we were. The other book, Guilt Unplugged, even more stronger title, Waking Up from the Lie That We've Been Living. Okay, so I assure you those reads will be another benefit to whomever's ready to receive them. Thanks very much.
You.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you so much, John. I think that's been incredibly informative, and hopefully it will help anyone that, like you say, has those struggles.
Yeah. Beautiful.
At the moment. We will put the links to those books and your website in the details.
Please do.
So anyone can get in touch. But thank you so much. It's been fascinating.
Excellent. Great stuff. You're very welcome. And thank you again, Amanda.